Hello, I'm Michael Pohl, and this is my business ethics final project. We're going to talk about a few companies here and some ethical issues that they faced. The first company that we're going to speak of is Volkswagen and the diesel controversy. This ethical issue that occurred between 2009 and 2015, referred to by many in the public as Dieselgate, which involved software engineers creating code that would cause vehicles to display the legal minimum quantity of emissions when tested. And so there's several ethical issues that were involved, which were comprised of fraud and deception inflicted by the software technicians, but acknowledged by the company and produced despite. There was also major environmental impact due to these actions, which resulted in 40 times the environmental waste. In addition, this created legal problems for Volkswagen by violating the Clean Air Act. From a utilitarian perspective, one could argue that this made the vehicle more accessible to the public. However, considering the environmental impact this creates, the misconduct becomes a danger to society, thus causing a greater negative impact for a greater number of people, which isn't utilitarian. From a justice and fairness perspective, the fact that this was deliberately implemented to mislead the public, which would be considered cheating or dishonesty towards the consumers, this would be unethical in the justice and fairness approach. So, not right there either. From a human rights approach, this violates the natural human rights, which would be the right to health, by knowingly contributing to the increase in carbon emissions. This is violating the health of the public and increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease. This also violates the right to a healthy environment in the process. This all rests upon the injustice of dishonesty to the public, which violates the fundamental right to justice. With this issue, there are multiple stakeholders involved with this misconduct, with the employees that are involved causing a bad image for the rest of the employee stakeholders. The administration that was aware of this violation are also major stakeholders involved and created significant costs for the company and bad media attention towards Volkswagen. The customer is also a major stakeholder involved, causing many Volkswagen enthusiasts to feel cheated with their sizable investment and the effects of driving their vehicles has on the environment. Many experts agree that the increase in 40 times the nitrogen oxide levels and the device used to be a defeat device, which is any device that interferes with the software involved in nitrogen testing, is a direct violation of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act encompasses the testing of motor vehicles and providing clean air and public safety when operating vehicles in the US. The only argument that can be made that Volkswagen's actions were ethical is that they were acting out of competitive pressure to release a vehicle that was affordable. Otherwise, there is no excuse for the misconduct. The ethical advice to this company would be to keep all your stakeholders in mind before undermining your integrity and the environment that resulted in billions of losses to Volkswagen. Though keeping the secrecy made income in the short term. As we can see on the timeline on the left, in 2005, Volkswagen implements new diesel engine and software engineers implement the faulty code. 2014, the California Resource Board notices unusually high amounts of nitrogen emissions from Volkswagen diesel engines when road testing. 2015, the EPA finds that Volkswagen is found violating the Clean Air Act. And then 2017, Volkswagen meets to discuss the US lawsuits of $14.73 billion. So we're going to move on to the next company, Apple. Apple and the FBI encryption dispute. This involved the FBI approaching Apple multiple times to unlock separate iPhone devices that were in connection to a triple homicide and a terrorist situation. However, this could have put the legitimacy of privacy of many other Apple iPhone users into the discussion. So, the ethical issues that are in question for Apple is their adherence to the users of their devices' right to privacy. If Apple would have allowed the iPhones to be accessed by the FBI, that could have given them premise to do this on other occasions. The other side of the problem involves adhering to justice, considering that the FBI brought a court order for the iPhones to be unlocked on multiple circumstances. From the utilitarian perspective, this can be considered a violation of privacy to many more people than have been affected by the FBI's investigation. So, for Apple to have unlocked the iPhones, this would have been unethical. From the justice and fairness perspective, this can be a difficult decision because the people that were involved with the terrorist situation deserve justice. However, it would be unfair to give the government this right because it could allow them, any iPhone users, privacy. So this would be considered unethical. From a universal ethics perspective, Apple would be compelled to give up privacy because it would be a violation of the court order that would be presented from a universal ethics perspective. With a universal ethics perspective abiding by the natural laws, they would have seen Apple being required to provide this information and would have seen doing so as ethical. So, from a universal ethics perspective, we may have seen this as ethical. From a virtue and values perspective, this would have been unethical because it would have broken Apple's core values, which have held privacy and security to a high standard since the times of creating the first iMacs. The many stakeholders involved, as the company Apple, who see this situation as unethical and against the rights as a company to provide this information. The US government is also a stakeholder in this that see it as a key component to their investigation and believe they have the right to the data stored within the device. So the government's a stakeholder and the company Apple's a stakeholder. And then the third stakeholder is the billions of consumers who would be at risk of their privacy rights being violated by Apple and the US government. There are many experts that believe that what Apple did was the right thing by preventing the government from gaining access. A writer from Loyola University, Chicago, Paulina Hasselhorst, states that the request from non-existent software could set a legal precedent for permitting additional non-standard privacy compromising demands, which shows that if Apple was to allow this, it wouldn't be the last time that the government gained access. Though Apple did make the ethical choice by not allowing the government to gain access to the devices, one could argue that Apple should have given them the access to the device. This argument can be made to the potential lives at risk due to a terrorist being involved, and that giving the information could have prevented further similar situations. However, this is the only concept where this would have been an ethical action. In hindsight, Apple stayed true to their values by preventing the government from gaining access to the devices. This meant that the privacy of their customers was more important than the government investigation, and I believe they did the right thing by making this choice by their standards and sticking to their standards. As we can see on the left, there's a timeline. On the Apple timeline, February 16th, 2016, there was a court mandate. The Los Angeles court opens a counter-terrorist investigation and mandates Apple to unlock an iPhone 5C used by a terrorist by the name of Farouk. February 29th, 2016, the court denies the US government's request to force Apple to bypass the iPhone security. March 28, 2016, the US government bypasses the iPhone 5C security measure using a third party other than Apple themselves. So as we can see, this was previous dates. And then January 7th, 2020, the US government once again asked Apple to open a device involved with a triple murder in Florida. So there's another situation where this has occurred. So we're going to move on to Wells Fargo. This ethical dilemma involved employees creating accounts and appearing to have forged signatures to meet their daily quotas for accounts created within Wells Fargo. So as we can see, the Wells Fargo cross-selling, there were two major ethical issues at stake for Wells Fargo: the major breach in trust of consumers and the right to the Consumer Financial Protection Act by creating over 2 million accounts in under 5 years and misleading consumers. This could even be considered a violation of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which was created to prevent misconduct that caused the past financial institute instabilities. Due to removing the consumer from having the ability to make informed decisions about their finances. From the utilitarian perspective, this can be seen as an ethical violation due to the financial problems it may have caused for the millions of consumers involved in the controversy, and only a gain for, according to Brian Tenyon, 30 employees committed the violation and shortly lost their job after. From the justice and fairness perspective, this is unethical due to the idea that customers were treated unfairly by having accounts open against their will and signed signatures forged without their authorization. This could also be considered an injustice to the employees that were involved for both pressuring employees to meet quotas that were impossible and losing their employment due to this decision. The human rights approach: this is a violation of their privacy, with these unauthorized actions encroaching upon individuals' rights to control over their personal information. This also violated the employees' rights to the National Labor Relations Act, which prevents employers from threatening consequences due to unachievable quotas. The stakeholders involved in this dilemma is corporate Wells Fargo, who received negative media attention and financial consequences due to the misconduct and can be considered to blame for the quotas. The employees that caused this are a stakeholder and can be considered to blame for distrust amongst the public towards their coworkers. The last stakeholder can be considered the people that's credit information was used and a victim of the misconduct that were forced to pay a $25 fee due to the employee's actions. One expert that was highly critical of Wells Fargo's actions was Senator Elizabeth Warren, who claims that cross-selling was only about pumping up Wells Fargo's stock prices, which shows that much of the blame is to be put on the Wells Fargo's corporation for pressuring the employees to commit fraud rather than the staff directly involved, because these quotas were measures out of their control that they were forced to abide by. The arguments can be made that the employees were acting ethically because they were afraid of losing their employment due to low performance. This form of threatening behavior by the corporation caused them to act unethically. However, the employees that committed this misconduct resulted to illegal measures that involve forgery and financial hardship for the customers, which causes the malpractice to be inexcusable. In hindsight, making unachievable quotas promotes a toxic work environment for employees that are prone to creating misconduct. The more productive approach would have been to offer rewards for employees achieving high standards and not making these standards the foundation of performance. Wells Fargo's employees are found to have been actively committing the account misconduct between these dates, as we can see on this timeline over here. May 11th to July 2015, and Wells Fargo account scandal revealed on September 8th, 2016, Wells Fargo was found guilty by the LA attorney and comptroller of the currency and fined $185 million. Wells Fargo ends cross-selling September 3rd, 2016. Wells Fargo announces that it would no longer be cross-selling. And then employees seek justice. Former Wells Fargo's employees create a lawsuit to be reinstated after their termination because they were forced to cross-sell. Wells Fargo attempts to restore their image. Wells Fargo begins on October 24th, 2016, to implement media marketing tactics to restore the public relationship. So now we're going to move on to Uber with the driver wage disputes. This controversy involved Uber deducting pay from New York drivers that was meant to be paid by the rideshare app users, and Uber's substandard employer performance of not offering benefits such as sick pay. The ethical conflicts that are at stake for Uber in this circumstance are quite high, considering the violations. The issue that Uber faces can be considered a violation of New York's sick leave laws, with employers with as little as 4 or less employees being required to pay 40 hours of sick leave per year in New York State. This is due to there being no federal law requiring sick pay. There can also be considered this can also be considered a violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act by misleading the deductions to the drivers, stating that Uber would only deduct commission for the driver's fare. So they misled them there. For a virtues ethics perspective, from a virtues ethics perspective, this would be considered unethical because of Uber's statements towards only charging for fares. This is because this would break the Aristotelian values of truthfulness and integrity. Aristotelian. The violation of the New York sick pay laws would also be considered a form of unjust treatment toward the Uber drivers. From a utilitarian perspective, this would be considered a split decision, considering that the fees should have been paid for by the drivers. Due to this, both the corporate stakeholder and customer benefit from this, with the few drivers that participated in it being the main stakeholder subject to negative impacts. This could also be considered the greatest utility for the greatest amount of people, considering that it caused Uber to grow with many people to reach their destinations with the app. However, fairly paying the drivers would have resulted with all stakeholders being pleased with the results, so this would be still considered unethical. From a justice and fairness perspective, this would be considered unethical misconduct due to employee stakeholders being unfairly misled by Uber's terms of service and their unjust pay for their contributions to the corporation. In addition to this, the failure to pay sick pay would once again be considered unjust treatment of workers' rights under New York state law, and thus unethical, injustice, and fairness ethical perspective approach. The three stakeholders involved in this controversy are the drivers, the ride sharers, and Uber Corporation. The driver's stake in this circumstance being the victim to Uber's misleading deductions that resulted in over $290 million in back pay wage. The driver stakeholders were also the main advocate to bringing justice to the matter. The rider stakeholder in this dilemma was being the intended recipient of the charges, so they should have been the one that was paying for this. And though the riders are innocent of involvement, they should have been the original source of these payments. The Uber Corporation stake here is the primary role of the misconduct, and by misleading the other stakeholders involved, they compromised their integrity for many New York ride sharers and drivers. An expert involved, the Attorney General, Letitia James, that was involved in the New York Uber case, issued a statement. For years, Uber and Lyft systematically cheated the drivers out of hundreds of millions of dollars in pay and benefits while they worked long hours in challenging conditions. This shows that this has been an ongoing catalyst for misconduct, and without legal action would have resulted in multiple more New York Uber drivers exposed to the malpractice and loss of revenue. From the standpoint that Uber drivers were saving the price of the charges and could have promoted more business for New York Uber drivers, could have been an ethical argument in favor of the Uber Corporation. Along with the violation of the sick pay, the only excuse could be due to the lack of federal requirements of sick pay, and this relationship with Uber's national model. However, with Uber employing residents inside of New York's laws and limitations, they are subject to these wages, making this ethically inexcusable. In hindsight, Uber was able to make a grand public appearance by keeping prices low for the rideshare users and raising prices along with placing the expense onto the drivers employed on the app. However, Uber could have acted ethically from the beginning, and they could have prevented millions of dollars in fines that could have been the responsibility of the riders using their service. If we look to the left, we can see the Uber wage dispute timeline. And we can see between 2014 and 2017, Uber deducts fees from New York drivers on their rideshare app and fails to offer sick pay. October 2023, Uber and Lyft are fined a total of $328 million due to fraudulent finances that were deducted from drivers. And then November 2023, Uber creates new program where drivers earn a minimum wage of $26 an hour and have access to sick pay for every 30 hours that have been worked. So, big turnaround from Uber. And then the last company, Amazon, which did dynamic pricing deception, a mathematics scheme and business tactic produced by Amazon online team and referred to by Julius Shapiro as Project Nessie, which was capable of effectively raising the prices of products using a method of analyzing and updating prices in real time. So the two primary ethical issues that are possibly at stake for Amazon in the circumstances are its violation of antitrust laws in the form of creating prices using a misleading approach that attempts to take advantage over the customer inability to find lower pricing. The second stake is the controversy to the approach to restrain the market of their competitors by making their listings more difficult to locate. From a utilitarian perspective, this could be considered unethical because this causes raises in prices from not only Amazon online stores, but also was used to compel their competitors to raise their prices. This means that the people are being exposed to inflation, which wouldn't align with the perspective of a positive impact. From a virtues perspective, this tactic is being deployed according to Julia as a secret algorithm, which wouldn't be trustworthy. And it wouldn't also be temperate because it's taking advantage of companies to no restraint. So it would also be considered unethical. From a justice and fairness perspective, this would be considered unethical behavior due to the anti-competitive nature of the algorithm being evaluated as a form of unfair practice from Amazon's online team. This also wouldn't be considered justifiable behavior due to the misleading of consumer prices, which resulted in market inflation due to having narrow purchasing options at a greater cost, which impacted, according to Julia, 8 million items. The three shareholders that are involved in this dilemma, which consists of consumers, Amazon competitors, and Amazon themselves. Amazon's goal was to increase revenue, but at the cost of malpractice. And the FTC has unfair strategies to illegally maintain its monopoly power, which shows its disregard for other stakeholders involved. Amazon's competition as a stakeholder was left with only two options of being compliant to Amazon's pricings or be suppressed by the business giant. The consumer stakeholder was left exposed to high prices due to the system's implementation and was given few other options to purchase many products at competitive prices. Many experts agree that Amazon's actions were of dynamic pricing were unethical, with Victoria Graham stating Amazon's illegal exclusionary conduct makes it impossible for competitors to gain a foothold. This shows how detrimental this was. The only ethical argument for these practices could have been made from Amazon themselves, stating that Project Nessie was aimed to prevent unstable price matching and low prices. So it shows that there could have been a positive impact, but Lauren Roosevelt estimated that it extracted $1 billion from American households. And in hindsight, Amazon would have been better off competitively pricing or an honest price matching alternative alongside their competitors rather than misleading stakeholders and creating an environment that doesn't promote a free market. And here's my timeline. Project Nessie 2015 to 2019 was created. The profits and closure happened between 2019, $1 billion, and then they phased it out, they said. And then they returned in 2022 with Julia Shapiro stating that an exclusive report suggested their old friend Nessie back in early 2022 to boast profits. So that's all I have for the presentation. And I have references for each of them ordered from the type. I mean, from the where they were located in section. And then I also have photo references for the photos I used throughout the presentation. Thank you for watching.